Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. We got a packed house. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Group Black's Cultured Unleashed stage. I'm so grateful that each and every one of you are here for this incredibly important conversation. I'm also very thrilled to announce that we officially are launching our new platform, She's Good for Real, a first-of-its-kind digital platform within everyday health designed to empower Black women to advocate for the health of ourselves and for the health of our families, no matter what life stage you're in. With the unveiling of the platform, we're also honored to announce the incredible Tatyana Ali as our spokesperson and community ambassador. And I'm really excited because as a part of her collaboration with She's Good, Group Black will support Baby Yams, Tatyana's first venture into the retail space, offering handmade, heirloom, beautiful quality quilts, and they're called abundance quilts, with 100% of the proceeds going to Black and Indigenous midwives and doulas who are out delivering much needed care to deserving families. Please, please. Oh, thank you. Tatyana, we are incredibly thrilled that you're one of our community ambassadors. We're so grateful for you being a part of this movement. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, now on to the discussion. So joining Tatyana and I on stage are some other formidable panelists. So I'll go ahead and announce them and we can get this conversation started. So first we have Lina Polimeni. Hi. She is the Chief Corporate Brand Officer of Lilly and Company. We have Khari Motayne, who's the Vice President of Engagement Strategy at CMI Media Group. And we have Alencia Johnson, who's the founder and Chief Impact Officer of 1063 Restaurant. And I'm Ashley Banks, SVP of Revenue over at Group Black, and also a co-creator of She's Good for Real, in tandem with Asha Davis, who is the SVP of Brand Strategy. So let's dive in. I would love to just hear a little bit about y'all's backgrounds and how you're advocating for Black women in the healthcare industry.
I could start. I'm an actress. I'm a singer. I've been involved in storytelling since I was a very small child, since I was about 4. But I come to the Black maternal health space as a mother, as a Black woman whose child and life were actually put in jeopardy during my first birth at the hospital. When I became pregnant with my second baby, I needed to find a different way. My husband and I were just terrified to go back into the hospital. That was 4 years ago, so I was very pregnant with my second son when I went on this journey and started to learn as much as I could about reproductive justice health. I found my Black midwife during that time, an incredible midwife who's now in Virginia with her own birth clinic. And what really fueled my advocacy was how common my story was. Every single place I talk to this day, somebody multi-generationally has a story with so many similarities. And so I just don't want us to have to deal with this anymore, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to create a true ecosystem where there's culture change and systemic change.
Thank you. Lina.
Yes, hi everyone. It's great to be here today. My name is Lina Polimeni, and as Ashley said, I'm the Chief Corporate Brand Officer for Lilly, a medicine company that is dedicated to, doing our best to address big health issues such as diabetes, issues in oncology, obesity, neuroscience, disease, Alzheimer's, and so forth. And a lot of the work we do, I come from a perspective of marketing and the commercial organization, so been partnering with Group Black in making sure that a lot of the work we do is also geared to, it's always about the need of the patient. And so for us is the work that we do from the clinical side of things all the way down to the commercial side is wherever the greatest patient need is. And so to Tatyana's point, a lot of the patient needs, especially in the United States community, is towards people of color and women specifically. So there's a lot of the work that we do this year to create an equitable environment and trying to do our best to address those barriers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, preparing for this panel, it gave me the opportunity to have a conversation with a lot of Black women in my life. And I think all of the Black mothers I talked to said one thing, and they said it felt like I was going into being on an assembly line.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
every single person said that, unprompted. It was just that unifying story. And I think, I'm getting married next month, and as we're thinking about family planning, it's something that's so important to us. And I think that, in addition to the anecdotal parts of it, it's just, if you look at the data, it's just staggering. I mean, between 1999 and 2020, there were 1.63 million excess deaths in the Black community because of health inequities.
Yes.
And that translated to 80 million years. And you think about the potential and the experiences and the earnings and all of that what that would mean to all of those families. It's such an important topic and it's so critical. I'm so grateful for Group Black for having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation and so focusing, I know today we're focusing on maternal health, particularly for Black women, but in general, Black women's health. My background before I started my own consultancy is advocacy and politics. I spent 6 years working at Planned Parenthood's national office. And something that a lot of people don't know is that I actually did not want to work for Planned Parenthood when they approached me, because while the issue is very important to me, it's very personal to me. I've had my own healthcare scare, reproductive healthcare scare in college. My mother, grandmother all had their own circumstances. I did not see myself reflected in the women's movement. It's a very white women's movement. And then I had some good friends that said, well, why don't you go inside and disrupt and change it, right? And I spent 6 years there after doing some work for some presidential campaigns and spending a lot of time centering the needs and the voices of Black women. It's one thing to talk about the needs of Black women, but when we're not at the table making the decisions with the resources, it can come across as a savior complex, right? And so I really wanted to disrupt that and change that. And I think the work that I did there with the other Black women, they called us the little underground railroad at Planned Parenthood, we really started to show up better for the broader reproductive freedom movement and started to have better relationships with reproductive justice organizations that are women of color and Black women-led organizations. And so this issue is personal for me, but also I had to go in and work to change the system. And so while I don't work there anymore, it's still a huge piece of all of the work that I do with all of my clients because it is such an imperative issue. And especially because I'm not a mother yet, but I do want to be a mother. And it shouldn't have taken Serena Williams being so open about her story for us to really understand that this is a detrimental issue. It's a life or death issue for Black women who literally just want to give life to the world.
Exactly. And that's truly the impetus of us starting She's Good. It was hearing those stories. So I wanted to ask, in what ways can storytelling and media representation be utilized to raise awareness and drive action on issues that are related to Black women's health? Because I know each of you actually play a part in that today. Who would like to go first?
Well, I can pick up where I left off. Storytelling is so important. It's part of the work that I've done, Planned Parenthood, presidential campaigns, with my consultancy. We have to humanize experiences first for us to see each other with dignity, to challenge our biases, right? That's through entertainment, TV and film. It's through advertising as well. And so it's so imperative for us to understand what is happening, the diversity of experience. Black women, we are not a monolith. Everybody's story is not a monolith. And so therefore that helps us check our biases. And one thing, I'm glad we're having this conversation in the middle of Black Maternal Health Week. I was paying attention to social media and how the conversations are going. Right now, everyone knows the stats of Black women dying in childbirth, which is great. I'm so grateful that we understand the urgency of now. But there were a few folks, and some of my friends as well, were elevating that we also have to share the great birthing stories that Black women are having too, right? Because then we can radically imagine a world that actually centers Black women and provides us this beautiful experience. And if we can't imagine it, we can't build towards it, right? We can't dismantle the system to build towards it. And we also can't see the solutions that Black women are finding on their own, from using midwives and doulas. And there's research that shows the presence of midwives and doulas actually helps improve the outcomes of Black women. And so it's so important for us to have the diversity of the stories that we are consuming. And just as much as we're consuming television, TV, and film, stories through TV and film, we're consuming those through television commercials, the ads as well. And those are shifting our subconscious biases, and it's really important to do that.
Yeah, I think that there's a ton that can be done in terms of talking about not just patients, I think, but also caretakers. And I think that, I myself, I have to be a caretaker probably to my parents at one point, but that largely ends up falling on Black women. And I think that, when we start talking about medical gaslighting and those sorts of things, there's not always the information and the knowledge among caretakers to be that, that additional, support for those patients when they get into those medical rooms. So I think that when we think about storytelling, there's the opportunity to not just tell patient stories and positive patient outcomes, but also have a real conversation about caretaking and what that whole process, is as we go to every different stage of our lives.
I feel like representation is one step, honestly, only is in storytelling, but where a lot of the challenge lies sometimes, especially if from an advertiser perspective, is making sure that you just don't stop at representation. So, to you guys' point, for us, for example, in oncology being a big space, in breast cancer, Black women have 40% higher mortality in breast cancer than any other community, really, and then white women. And I feel like that's a statistic that a lot of women know, but at the same time, so it's great to have, I think a lot of advertisers would approach this from a representation in terms of cast and in terms of your advertising piece. What's more important to me is making sure that each brand and each advertiser, because to your point, that is what shapes perception and knowledge, understands also the action behind it. So, we do know, just statistically, that not only there's a 40% increased death rate, but breast cancer kills Black women more than any other group. And so if you know that as a marketer, being in a conference here of marketers, then, we have target patients and we build strategy around this, then your target patient and the strategy should be built around a Black woman. Because if you start from the patient need, and that's just for us working in health specifically, then the patient needs drives your action and your storytelling, then that is the shift that needs to happen. And that has to be backed up by actions like some of the mobile units that we do for screening, for examples, are born specifically so that there is access to screening, which is the biggest saving in health in terms of, detecting cancer early. So I think, representation is, obviously it's a great step forward, is not necessarily enough when it comes to storytelling because it doesn't always drive action.
Can I just add something to what you said? And this is me as a consumer, right? Me as a mom, me as a woman in her 40s, say, okay, do I need to get a mammogram? Having a doctor that was like, oh no, insurance says you don't have to do that. The authenticity of the story, the authenticity is what pulls me in. And so then oftentimes, this is me as a consumer, I'm piecing together my information from content on social, from content on this, because there isn't anything necessarily authentically speaking to me. Because authenticity doesn't just mean somebody that looks like me. It's we're more savvy than that. Well, I can read it. Yeah. I don't know how to quite define that quality that feels true.
Yeah.
It's the nuance. And it does have everything to do with who's in the room creating the story.
And think about the barrier, right? If there are solutions to health, and when you're talking about health, then you're putting a barrier if you are not starting from a place of insights that's authentic. Yes. And that requires people in the room that care. But also, I always say, for you to create an equitable space, you have to be able to call out the inequity. And that's what a lot of people don't do, a lot of advertisers don't do, is you have to address systemic racism in the healthcare ecosystem and say that it exists, and the same healthcare ecosystem doesn't treat everybody the same way in the same country before you're able to create, before you can even worry about content. So I do think that's one of the biggest challenges for us in advertising.
To the point really quickly that Tatyana was making about the consumer receiving this information, the stories, there's a lot of research that shows that there are consumers or audiences who actually overwhelmingly believe that the information that they're getting is accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the responsibility that storytellers have. And then to the point about breast cancer, I mean, I have a lineage of breast cancer survivors. If I would have waited till the CDC to start getting a mammogram, I wouldn't have found a lump in my breast at 35. That was benign, right? And so these stories allow for us to center ourselves in the conversation with our doctors, right? To not just, to your point, Tatyana, listen to what the doctor says, even though we know that our experience is different, and it has to be inclusive of all of that.
And it doesn't just stop with us. We were looking at the data, and about 55% of Black women in America feel like there isn't relevant health and wellness content that was created for us and by us. And so thinking about how important that storytelling is, thinking about how to center us has really been where we've had the impetus to start She's Good. It started by 2 Black women at Group Black having conversations with each other about some of the inequities that we've faced and how we utilize word of mouth, social media, piecing things together to be able to advocate for ourselves. So why not work with partners who have access to medical review boards, who have access to resources, and then utilize them through the lens of us and our stories.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing today when we're getting ready to launch the site, which we urge everyone to go and visit. We'll have a QR code soon. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. Can we talk about what you believe is the biggest challenge the industry faces when it comes to amplifying diverse voices and diverse stories, especially when trying to reach multicultural audiences?
I think that there is the element of even when we go into health, even inside of the community, it's not something that's talked about unless, in a lot of contexts. Like, for example, my mom noticed that an HCP was not really respecting my grandmother's opinion when it comes to this discussion, and she didn't realize that until she went to the doctor with her. And I think that it's that element of being able to tell those stories and just start those conversations that can be really impactful in terms of like driving this conversation forward.
I was just going to ask from again, I think from an advertising perspective, a client side, if you will, perspective, I think there is a responsibility there. And I think the big challenge or the shift that needs to happen is not just let's empower multicultural voices, of course, but in what world in marketing, as a brand builder, since we're in a marketing conference, in what world do you not create content that resonates and is true with your audience? So in the context of the United States being 40% at a minimum diverse, in what world does a marketer not create content that is relevant? And when you take it to, in my case, a company that talks about health, a company that puts health above all, if it's true, then, part of the challenge is continuing to not, you can have that consensus internally, but continue to put resources and continue to put investment to make sure that not just the content is reflective of the medicine that is created that way, but that the medicine and the way we create medicine changes to be reflective of the people that we're trying to help.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the other piece to it is just, of course, being medical marketers, like we have to deal with legal a lot. And I think that a lot of times, we're at this point where we have all this data, and I think we're oftentimes scared to use it. And I think that sometimes we can push the envelope a little bit more. Sometimes we can push those conversations with the legal team a little bit more, and be a little bit more open about approaching certain tactics, approaching certain strategies, approaching new partners that we know are going to reach those audiences and start those conversations.
Well, and I think, to these points that you're making, and be very clear, the resources folks are talking about, investment, is money, right? Mm-hmm. Like putting the money behind it. And also the investment and who is making the decision, right? I think I've shared with some folks that I was with a business partner. We were strategizing with a major brand about a concept for engaging Black women. And the decision makers were not Black women. And they told myself and my business partner that our strategy wouldn't actually improve outcomes for Black women, even though that's literally the work that I do. day in and
Okay.
day out, and I am a Black woman, right? And the Black woman staff on the team was actually in tears when we presented our proposal because it was so powerful. But again, the non-Black women made the decision that it actually wasn't going to meet their goals of engaging Black women. And so it's the power sharing. It's the power sharing, it's the money, and this piece about risk. Listen, I've been in enough rooms where folks are like, oh, we don't want to get too political, it's too, the policy, this. Well, not doing that is the reason that laws on our bodies are under attack. It's the reason that DEI is under attack. And the reality is, majority of consumers, we've talked about this, majority of consumers actually want brands to take a stance on certain social issues, right? And you see that groundswell not just from consumers, but you see it from employee resource groups as well, right? And I spoke to so many employee resource groups when Roe v. Wade was overturned across the gamut of industries because they were so frustrated and they wanted their companies to do something. So this is the time that brands have to take a risk, and I'll be honest with you, while the legal team may say something, the majority of consumers, the people that you are engaging, they are actually going to stay on your side, right?
Exactly.
And back to the point about radical imagination, so, DEI now has become a target. Okay, well, let's reimagine it and change the name. Y'all are creative. Let's figure out a new name of it, right? Because the work still has to be done, and we can't be scared, especially when this is literally life or death for everyone.
When I mentioned ecosystems before, and this is somebody who's I'm not in the ad world, that question is definitely for you guys, but that is what needs to happen. There has to be an ecosystem, and if politics are not going to handle it and government's not going to handle it, it doesn't mean this is a capitalist society. It doesn't mean the need's not there. Right. The need is even greater. So yeah, that's my little tag onto that.
Well, let's get into really talking about what this means to you personally. So can you talk about why advocating for equity in healthcare is important to you? But also, what are the ways that you and your organization are working towards furthering the conversation? Because I know each one of you play a role in each of your organizations in order to do so. And by the way, I'm incredibly grateful to each of you for being a part of this and being staunch supporters of getting She's Good up and running.
You should start.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. I've spent most of my time. Why is this important to me? It's important to me because my baby ended up in the NICU because of what was done after we had a very successful, or not successful, but just a healthy, normal, really boring pregnancy. I don't want to pass that on. I want in my lifetime, I want an end to it. So I want us to be treated well, and I know what the difference in care when I did work with a midwife. I mean, love, kindness, compassion, we deserve it, and you don't realize there's so many of us who take on the traumas of the health system, and we just walk away with it, and we just walk and live our everyday lives, and we're carrying this stuff. I don't want us to have to carry that. We deserve better. So I want to make it better in my lifetime. So I've done that by amplifying the message of the reproductive justice advocates who truly guided me into my own healing. And then Baby Yams, I've been doing that for the last 4 years, but Baby Yams, which just launched, is really a way to bring capital to, I want to give the money away. I want to, it's just the beginning of being able to grant money so that midwives and doulas, indigenous communities, they have the very similar numbers to us for nuance, their differences and the reasons why. But white supremacy is the baseline, the huge reason. And we have maternal care deserts. They are the solution, midwives and doulas. And I want us to have access to them.
I absolutely agree. I feel the same way. It was being a product and experiencing some of the inequities myself that really drove me to work with the partners across Group Black to be able to get this launched. It came out of stories like what I've heard of yours, Serena's, Elaine's, and so it was imperative that it had to happen, and I'm glad it's happening now.
And let me also take this time to say that when I first met with Asha about She's Good for Real, my reaction to it the minute I clicked off of the Zoom call was,
yes,
because we need something that not just speaks to us, but is listening to us, listening to our needs, and really centering us.
And to feel heard and seen is so incredibly important for this. Lina?
You know, for me, especially working in medicine and working in a company like Lilly, there's so many, and not even being from this country, for me, just like mind-boggling how the ecosystem works here and how it's all for money, basically, and that, you know, there's, you know, even as a consumer, to your point. And I think what's fascinating is, again, if you just keep focus on people's needs and patient need, and that's really the guiding light. Pharmaceutical development or medical development has so many parts, all the way from clinical trials to the commercial organization. And I kind of get to have, if you think about it as a relay, I'm really like the last baton that's being handed to people, because media and advertising is who explains to people. But the most important part of that baton handling for me is I'm the side that gets to hear what people need and then relay that back to the organization and how to translate science and advancements in clinical trials into what people actually need. And so one of the things that, you know, there's so much needs and so many things that is not just what a company does or what, you know, one single person do, but to your point is also how do we call on a broader ecosystem to take responsibility. And, you know, one of the things that I think is still a big barrier, and I'm really proud, at least Lilly is addressing, is there is a lot of, because of all the trauma that's being carried, there's also a lot of trust that needs to be rebuilt, and companies need to, you know, especially in science, need to play that role. So if you think about it, you know, again, 40% of the population in the US is diverse. Only 20% of clinical trials actually are carried out of people of color. There are good reasons in history, not too far history, why there will be mistrust into enrolling into clinical trials. And so to your point about resources and money, putting goals as a company to actually increase that clinical trial rate so that it reflects the population for whom the medicine actually has to be created, to me that's an important way to tangibly do something. And then call out, I very much agree with your point of, one of the way you call out the ecosystem is to be able to actively do your part in numbers and in action, so that you can, you know, you can call people to their accountability as well. So I think the clinical trials diversification and doing that starting from communities and not just in a piece of paper, but actually going into communities and have teams that are dedicated to just understanding the patient need and how to communicate that, I think that's, you know, one of probably the bigger pieces that we're trying to address.
Yeah, for me, you know, I think personally, one, I mean, diabetes runs in my family, and so, you know, I think it's something that there are so many health disparities in that space that luckily, I think there are a lot of pharmaceutical advancements that have come up in recent years that are helping that. But there's such worse outcomes for Black and brown women when it comes to you know, diabetes, and I think some of it comes down to amputation. Like one stat I was reading was saying that 40 to 80% of amputations are not needed if there was a second opinion. Well, most people that are going in that are people of color are not going to know to go get that second opinion. And so I think that, you know, personally for me, I have diabetes, and so that aspect is personal for me, but it's like every disease state that I've worked in, I've seen and I've been able to identify there's some inequity here that's historically been there that just like isn't necessarily been talked about. And I think that, you know, on the pharmaceutical side, we manage so much media investment dollars, and from the storytelling aspect, that means that that's a lot of storytelling. Those are a lot of stories that we can tell that are compelling, that can change narratives, that can drive new research, drive new innovations. So I think that there's so much that's there. And, you know, at CMI in particular, like we started an inclusive media center of excellence. And, you know, it's so fortunate to now be able to have conversations like that with amazing partners like Group Black. And just, you know, continue to build that. Because I think that until we have that, you know, investment in media dollars, and until we're able to have that share of voice as well, I think we're still going to keep running into the same issues.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, you know, obviously those issues are extremely personal to me for a lot of reasons. And I'm grateful though that day to day I get to use kind of all of my experience of working with corporations as well as being very knowledgeable about the political and policy landscape. And so often I spend a lot more time now with corporations, their marketing, and typically their marketing and public affairs teams, and helping them to show that they care about an issue. And I'll tell them, you actually don't have to say anything about this policy, what's happening in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C. It is a cesspool, like, leave that alone. Don't worry about that. But in order for advocates to really push for the systemic change policy-wise, there's a lot that has to happen in culture that advertising drives, right? The humanity of stories, the showing that you care, seeing people, elevating conversations. And there are so many organic ways that, you know, all of you can do that, and I tell that to my companies, like, you can be creative about this. I promise you, if you know, develop this plan over here, there's a way that folks in Washington, D.C. can use that to change the narrative there. And they can be totally disconnected, right? And one thing that I tell a lot of policy leaders is, like, y'all are not the best voices on a lot of these issues. They're stale, they don't work, but culture really drives understanding and conversation. And so I spend a lot of times with companies letting them understand their sphere of influence and their power, because I don't think folks realize the amount of power a lot of corporations and big brands have. And then how do you show up for an issue that actually makes sense for your brand, makes sense for your consumers? Don't worry about the connections in, you know, in DC policy-wise, or even in the medical industry. They're experts to do that. Your expertise is culture, and everything flows out of culture and creativity. And so it's actually kind of cool what I get to do with a lot of different companies. It looks different with each company. It looks different with each storyteller. But it all works together to center the needs of folks that actually help eventually get us to the policy solutions that we need. Because, you know, if you want people to care about an issue when they go to the ballot box, they first have to understand it. And that understanding comes from culture. And it has to be in a way that speaks directly to them versus, you know, the data points. I'm a data nerd and research nerd, but most people aren't, right? And so that's the important piece. And I think when companies feel as though they're scared to step into an issue, you don't have to step into it so directly. There's a way to do it creatively that's actually even more powerful, and so many folks like myself lean on your natural understanding of culture and creativity to do the work that we try to do every day.
So to that point, what actions do you believe are going to be the most crucial today to further the conversation around health disparities within women and Black women and women of color? What do you think we should be doing today? Outside of going and seeing She's Good, shameless plug, but what else do you think that we should be doing?
Yeah, I think Lina's point earlier was central. I think there's absolutely a need for that diversification of clinical trial data, and that's something that marketing can help with. You know, we've definitely run campaigns at CMI which are specifically aimed at how do we, you know, target folks and get them into clinical trials. How do we reach out to HCPs and have them have those conversations with their patients? And I think that until we have, you know, especially in this new technological era where data is going to be even more critical to the healthcare space than it has been in the past, the future of health is centered around that data. And until we have that enough data to where we can build these personalized healthcare options, I think that's really going to be the biggest barrier. And I think that, you know, as an industry, we've been able to be successful in diversifying clinical trial data when it comes to women in general. But we have yet to do that when it comes to Black folks, and we've definitely been struggling to do that when it comes to Black women. And so I think we absolutely have to have that concentration and move from there. And then once we have that, we can start to you know, kind of actually, you know, I think break it down. Because I think that the worst part, or I guess the most horrifying part, as I've been looking through this information, is that no one has been able to pinpoint why there are these massive disparities, because it's not memes, right? I think the Times came out with you know, it's Black women who are making over $100,000 a year have higher rates of mortality than the bottom 10% of white women, and there's clearly not been enough research because we don't really have a clear understanding as to why.
Bias is why.
100%.
That's right.
That
It's
is
bias.
absolutely.
And if me, you know, not being in the ad world, but being here at this amazing conference and being in front of you, I would ask you to also not apply bias to your consumers.
Absolutely.
Because that's when there's no feedback, there's no listening, and there's no communication, and very much like in some of these health situations, you're just being talked at and talked to and moved through, but the care that you need, the story that you need, the attention that you need, it's not for you.
Yeah.
So you're left alone and without.
Yeah, personally, I really believe that. I agree with the clinical trials point. There's definitely, actual things that we can do. But I really believe that if you want to continue to do work on equity, you have to have the courage to call out the inequity. And so very much, the bias is not just only in the care, but it's also in the way doctors are even trained. Some of the work we are doing, which, this is more on the immunology side, we realize, for example, in dermatology, dermatologist is a highly visual trained specialty. And so dermatologists are very trained to recognize disease by just looking. And we realize that there is not even training in a lot of medical schools where dermatologists can be trained and see, for example, atopic dermatitis, eczema on black skin and on darker skin. And so when they see a patient, which by the way, tends to be the highest, penetration of eczema tends to be with people of color, they're not used to training, so therefore they sometimes get dismissed patient. And so, but if you don't call out the inequity of, hey, there was no one in school that thought about maybe this is a visual disease, again, 40% of the population is diverse, this needs to be reflected, then you can't do the work. So for example, for us, some of the work is when we have clinical trials, then we'll use some of the pictures that we use in clinical trials to then feed that back into the medical community and give them to the medical community so that dermatologists of the future, unfortunately, can be trained into, in just having a visibility into the disease in different populations. So I do think, if I were to summarize in terms of, yes, there's many actions that we can and should take, but the biggest thing you can do in whatever level of work you do in this space is to always have the courage to call out the inequity. If you can call out the inequity, then you can do the work on equity.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and I think so. There are a couple of things. Like today, you can donate to Tatyana's organization. You can donate to Black Mamas Matter. You can donate to the Birth Fund. That will, like all of these Black women-led organizations that are actually trying to, unfortunately, fill in the gap when our healthcare system and the government are failing us. I think those are very tangible things that you all could, and I'm going to say should do today, this week, Black Maternal Health Week. And then to this point that you're talking about calling out the inequities, I think the theme of what I've been talking about is take those risks and challenge your company and your organization to take those, what they perceive as risks, but reality, it's just showing up for humanity, right? When we center the most marginalized, it's like the curb cut effect. When you solve for the most marginalized, everyone else is going to get free. You're solving for Black women, you're going to free a lot of Black folks and a lot of women.
Yes.
So if we solve for the most marginalized, and have the courage to be disruptive and call out those inequities and challenge and ask where those dollars are going, ask where those partnerships are going, ask who is going to be at the table and making decisions, that's really important. And that's the long-term work, but again, I'll stress, please donate to these organizations that are led by Black women that are standing in the gap.
And everyone here has the power to be a part of the collaboration. So find myself, find Asha, who is in the crowd as well, right back there. We would love to speak with you about how you can be a part of all of the organizations that we called out today, especially She's Good, because this movement has to be funded, so everyone here can be a part of it.
Yes.
Thank you all again for joining us. We are so grateful that you've all been a part of the conversation.
I'm just going to say a few words. I know he wants me in front of the camera. I don't want to stand in front of the beautiful panel, but he wants me on. First, I just want to say thank you to Ashley Banks. Not our beautiful Ashley Banks, but the other one. No, I'm teasing. Ashley Banks as well.
It was about time. I didn't know when it was going to happen. But he did that.
The irony is pretty stunning. So I just but also to everybody. But I think
at the end of the panel this comes out. Yeah.
So first, I think she's goodforreal.com. It's up. There's a very moving video that talks about the challenges of female health. I mean, my mom was told that she couldn't have kids, and I'm lucky that I'm here. and I have a lovely young brother who's sometimes a pain in my butt, but he's here as well. And, you know, I think, to me, one of the biggest pieces that we forget sometimes is that if those that look like us understand us, and that's not just about diversity thing, that's women doctors working with women. I'll tell you my personal story. I ran into a friend down here, and first I just want to say, you know, we kept mentioning Asha's name. Where's Asha? Asha, wave your hand. Asha's back there. So Asha was a part of this. We're only allowed to have one group black person on a panel, I guess. Apparently that's a new rule. But, you know, when we were hiring Asha, we asked Asha, everybody, she had interviewed with like 50 people. And then somebody was like, hey, can she just do a project so we can see how she thinks? I was like, really? I was like, okay, and it was on a Friday. I sent her 2 slides, and it was originally around maternal health is where we kind of started the dig site. You know, Ashley can talk about, you know, she talked about her experience there. And then I said, don't do too much, just the weekend. Monday I had like an 85-page deck, but the opening slide was what I have on my shirt. And it's a black mom with her head turned to the back, and you see the baby, and it said, imagine literally dying to become a mom. And I said, is she qualified now, people? Now you tell me, what's the deal? But my personal experience was I met a friend down here, and he introduced me. He had a cardiologist, and it was a black cardiologist. And I told him, I said, you know, I'm trying to, you know, look, I'm getting old, so I'm not going to lie to you. Like, you know, I got to deal with blood pressure, diabetes. I don't have it, but luckily, but all the stuff, you know, that we have to. And none of the doctors in New York, it just wasn't working out. So it took me like 7 months, but finally I met with him. And he said, look, I understand how medications work inside of our people's body. I understand how you, and it literally, I remember sitting in a chair and crying because it was the first time that I felt like somebody actually understood what my real challenges were. So the point here is that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is provide services and access and information and knowledge that's not being provided anywhere else, that is tailored specifically to groups that the medical profession just doesn't understand it. I unfortunately lost my dad because a young doctor told me don't get him. You know, anyway, long story short is I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. And I'm excited. Thank you for all of you. And yes, she's goodforreal.com. And let's give a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ashleys. No. All right. Thank you guys. Do that housekeeping. I got a little emotional.
Yes.
So, you know, mingle amongst yourselves, but don't leave. So just put me back up versus the music. So just for detail, the next panel is about HBCUs and the program that we're announcing and launching in our investment in HBCUs, focused on a conversation with the head of P&G marketing. So just want to make sure that I provide that background. Okay, guys.